Enterprise Alliance. And probably most importantly to this conversation actually was a former lobbyist, and so have been really been championing SEA's role in trying to get more involved in policy efforts. And truthfully, there's probably no better person than Marc Lane to talk to us about not only the work that he's done in Illinois to get people's attention around social enterprise, but also the actual action that he's gotten. And so one of the things we wanted to do is kind of reprise the presentation that he actually did at the summit for those people who were not able to participate. We've had a lot of new people who've come into the Social Enterprise Alliance, as well as people who are policymakers who are very interested in social enterprise as well. And so we thought it would be great for us to do this through a webinar in order to give people access today to the information, but also access in the future. So we'll also be recording this as well so that people have access and they can use it at policy meetings. They can use it whenever they wish over the internet. So let me tell you a little bit about Marc. To be honest, I could go on and on about how great of a person he is and all that he has done. He is an attorney, but he is a very special attorney in that he also, I think, really understands and has a practical understanding of social enterprise and has worked with nonprofits. He's worked with business. He's worked with foundations. He currently serves as chair of the Illinois Task Force on Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Enterprise, which is actually an appointment by Governor Quinn. He teaches a social enterprise course at Northwestern and just has a lot of different things that he has done, including writing 34 books on all sorts of different topics. So there is really no better person that understands it at a very policy and at a law level, but also really understands the practical part of social enterprise. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marc so he can walk you through how a social enterprise policy becomes a law, the Illinois experience.
Suzanne, thank you very much. That was very generous, and I appreciate your using up the hours, so I think we can now go about our business. That's very, very thoughtful, and I appreciate this opportunity, and most of you are good friends, and I appreciate your participation this afternoon. I'd like to really just describe some of my personal experiences in advancing the cause of social enterprise within the state of Illinois, really as a model that might be entertained by other states, and I hope that my experiences may prove instructive and may save you a step or two in your efforts. It started for me with the drafting of Illinois' low-profit limited liability company bill, which I prepared in 2009. I had had a hand in the earlier states' adoption of the L3C and in drafting their laws. And my conclusion and the conclusion of many at that point was that throughout the United States, but specifically in Illinois, there was a desperate need to attract private capital into the social sector, then as now. And the reason I say specifically in Illinois is because I'm not proud to report that Illinois, even today, has the lowest fiscal standing among states. So nonprofits that are dependent upon state grants or contracts are having an increasingly difficult time in monetizing their entitlements under those agreements or those grants. And similarly, philanthropy clearly isn't up to the task of the deepening social problems we faced then and continue to face. So the L3C was thought to be a constructive platform for capital formation, to facilitate program-related investments by foundations, and to leverage those investments to attract investment from what has come to be known as impact investors of various stripes. So I thought the time was certainly right, and I thought the L3C was an important part of the solution for reasons I'll get to in a minute. Having drafted the law, my first challenge was to secure sponsorship within the Illinois legislature, the General Assembly. One specific individual came immediately to mind. She is Heather Staines, who then was a freshman senator. She had chaired Donors Forum, which is the statewide organization of grant-making foundations as well as operating charities. and she and her family have been actively involved in revitalizing a distressed area of the city of Chicago. They're very philanthropic and socially conscious, and I thought this message would be appealing to her as she started to develop her own legislative agenda and ultimately her legacy. So she did, in fact, embrace the L3C bill. She introduced it. At that point, I was invited to testify before the Senate's Judiciary Committee, which was the committee of original jurisdiction for such bills. I candidly thought it was a courtesy visit. I didn't expect the bill to be terribly controversial. And I went down to Springfield. The Senate Judiciary Committee at that time had 15 members, all attorneys, and they offered me their hospitality for 2.5 hours on the stand. So it was a little more of a rigorous drilling than I anticipated. And many of the questions were very good and legitimate questions. Toward the end of the time of my testimony, one of the senators asked me, so if we do not enact L3C legislation in the state of Illinois, social enterprises will merely continue to use limited liability companies, right? And I responded, well, that's one possibility. The other is they might bring their ventures across Lake Michigan to the state of Michigan, which already has an L3C law, and bring their jobs with them. Well, as soon as I used the word jobs, the complexion of the room changed, and the senators unanimously passed the legislation on to the full Senate, where it unanimously passed. It then moved to the House, where it unanimously passed and was signed by the governor. And it then occurred to me that really social enterprise is something that is supported by both sides of the aisle. The more conservative side sees this as a private sector solution to social problems where government can do more with less. And the more liberal side of the aisle sees it, of course, as an enhancement to the social safety net and an opportunity to drive positive social change. So that was a very useful lesson for me. And at that point, I recognized that I now had both houses of the Illinois General Assembly and the governor for the first time focusing on social enterprise as an opportunity for empowerment and an opportunity for them to drive their own policies and legislative agendas. So the thought I had thereafter was, how do we build on that success? The success including, of course, having educated relevant policymakers in the state about what a social enterprise is and how it functions and how it creates jobs and opportunity and lifts people out of poverty. And initially, I was thinking about kind of building on that success by offering iterative policy recommendations that might result in regulation or law or the reduction or removal of barriers. But then it occurred to me that, well, I think we have a bigger opportunity than that. How about establishing a systematic approach where all of Illinois' laws and regulations can be looked at through the lens of social innovation and social enterprise and social entrepreneurship? And from there, the idea of the Task Force on Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Enterprise was born. The first step I had, my mother didn't raise any dummies, so I went back to Heather Staines. And I drafted a bill that would have created the task force. She, not surprisingly, embraced it. I had conversations then with the governor. He, too, embraced it. I was then invited to have a teleconference with the heads of all of the state agencies to explain what this task force might mean to them and their work and how to optimize the social outcomes of their various activities. And finally, I was invited to speak to the Serve Illinois Commission, in which I now serve. This is the agency that handles the state's volunteerism effort, as well as the AmeriCorps funding for the state of Illinois. And they were thought to be an important stakeholder in this process. And so I presented to them something of a slideshow, which I will now share with you in significant part. First, I educated them about what is a social enterprise. These definitions, I think, will be fairly familiar to you. SEA is one of them, and then there are some other iterations of that definition. I also presented this quote to them, now recognizing that public revenue is a significant driver of decision-making at the state level, as it is, I'm sure, at every level of government. I then, by way of example, showed them some of the prominent social enterprises in the state so that they could have something that they could relate to and identify with, because one or several of these logos would certainly be familiar to them. I also described to them how Illinois can be supportive of social enterprises, encouraging innovation, making a more hospitable environment for social enterprise initiatives, rewarding initiatives for their performance, scaling up, producing knowledge that's going to be enhancing of the social enterprises' efforts. And I also suggested some criteria that policymakers might consider. Does the effort bring a diverse group of stakeholders together? Will it live beyond the current administration? Will it be required to show impact by quantifying its success? Will it provide support for educating private and public groups on social innovation? I also indicated that there would be some advantages that Illinois, in fact, would stay on the cutting edge of sustainable solutions during the life of the task force, which I will describe to you. One of our objects has been identified in shorthand as making Illinois the Delaware of social enterprise, encouraging nonprofits, governments, and the private sector to bring money to Illinois to support these efforts, and how to achieve scalable and sustainable innovative solutions. Also identified what the duties of the task force and its members would be: gathering information, doing a mapping exercise, creating a directory of social enterprises. The theory here being that first surveying the landscape, then identifying specific mission-driven ventures, we can convert the state's supply chain into a value chain where each transaction from buyer to seller would enhance the financial sustainability of both, but also drive the mission of each. And we would receive testimony from experts in Illinois, outside Illinois, and import the best of ideas, tweak them for local conditions, and see if we can get them introduced into law and regulation. And ultimately develop a strategic plan that would be implemented at the conclusion of our work. I specifically provided that the task force would have a 2-year term, my goal being to hold everybody's feet to the fire, get the job done now rather than allowing for an opportunity of deferral. The issues with which we're dealing are so pressing, so urgent that time is our enemy. It's also important that when I populated the task force, I wanted everybody to understand that if you don't have the bandwidth to really work and roll up your shirt sleeves and get results done, we welcome your encouragement, but you're not a good member for our task force. So we do have people who are active and working hard. The first, and indeed the agencies and the Serve Illinois Commission all did embrace the notion. I was invited then to give consideration to whether this should be a commission or a task force. Under Illinois law, and I suspect under the laws of other states, there is a difference. I didn't know that going in, but I learned it. The difference is essentially that a commission operates, at least in Illinois, under Robert's Rules of Order. A task force, on the other hand, operates at the discretion of the chair. So if the goal is to get stuff done and you don't want to get bogged down in bureaucracy or rules or motions, task force might fit the bill better, or at least that was my conclusion, and that's what we ended up with. So we submitted the legislation, Heather Staines being the primary sponsor of the law in Illinois. And these were the arguments that were made. The legislation also provided for diversity in terms of representation of all of the relevant sectors. You will notice that it does include a representation of government agencies that are relevant, but it also invites participation by the corporate and nonprofit sectors, the universities, support organizations, and the Serve Illinois Commission, which is formerly known as the Illinois Commission on Volunteerism and Community Service, as well as other experts. And the task force purposes are very much the way the slideshow described them. This was our timeline. Report to the General Assembly and the Governor 6 months after the first meeting. Another report a year later. Final report 2 years after the first meeting, which would include the comprehensive statewide strategic plan, including a budget that is so that our work can now be carried on by others. I did run into a challenge early on, and it's a constitutional challenge. I'm telegraphing the fact that actually this was not the only constitutional challenge that was encountered. And that has to do with the fact that as soon as the legislation was to be introduced into this Illinois Senate, I got a call from the governor's office saying we had a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that the governor's staff, or an individual in the governor's staff, was uncomfortable with the fact that the bill prescribed that the governor was to provide staff and support for the task force. And I said, yes. And they said, well, he didn't like that. I said, why not? They said, well, because he doesn't like the General Assembly dictating terms to the governor. There's a division of powers issue here. And I said, well, every task force and every commission in the state has exactly the same language. That's right. However, we don't want to continue that because this further precedent is deemed to be jeopardizing the governor's prerogatives. I said, okay, so what do you think we do about that? And the answer was, I took my bill and recast it as an executive order, and the governor signed it. So we didn't actually have to go through the legislative process at all. It has the effect of law. It does survive the incumbent's term, and all of the substantive provisions remain good law just as they would have had it been a legislation. So it turned out to be a non-issue. Next step was the governor appointed me as chair. I think the lesson to be learned there is that if you initiate a process, you can assume that somebody's not going to saddle you with it on an ongoing basis, and I was really honored and privileged to do that. The next step was to populate the task force consistent with the criteria described in the executive order, which provided for this diversity of sector. And you will see the task force members that were appointed at that time. I believe we have Eric Weinheimer on the line, who president of the CARE program, who serves with me on the task force as well as on the Chicago chapter of SCA, and his contributions have been extraordinary. But you'll see the breadth and depth of experience, talents, and diversity of interests among this group have been extraordinarily helpful, indispensable. And then I encountered another constitutional issue. In populating the task force, one individual was very enthusiastic about serving, happens to be a client of mine, and he would have been a tremendous asset for the task force. He was the Assistant U.S. Surgeon General and the Administrator of Health and Human Services for this region, and a global expert on public health, Professor of Medicine at Northwestern University, and master's degree from Harvard, exceptionally talented guy. And he asked if he could serve, and I said, yeah, we'd love to have you, because obviously when we're talking about issues of poverty and education and public health, those are all entwined, and public health stands out as an important consideration these days. So he was invited to participate. The process by which one participates is you fill out an online form which goes through a clearance process to ensure that you meet constitutional and statutory requirements, part of a due diligence process the state has created for all gubernatorial appointments. He came back to me and he said, no, I can't do that. I said, oh? He says, yeah, my boss, meaning the the Secretary of Health, refused to have him participate in a process whereby he is essentially being asked to be appointed. I said, okay, what do you need? He said, I need a letter from the governor inviting me. I said, okay. So I had the governor write him a letter, whereupon, again, his employer declined to acquiesce in his appointment because the impression might be given that he was favoring one state over another or participating improperly in state affairs. So we end up both with a division of power and a separation of powers issue within the formation of the task force. Ultimately, the solution, which I think was a common sense solution, was that we set up a board of advisors who are technically not members of the task force, but people nevertheless who wanted to contribute to its work. And that was a very convenient bucket for us to put a couple of folks in who had an interest in what we were doing, but for political or internal reasons wouldn't serve on the task force. So we got the benefit of their input nonetheless. We then had our first meeting, setting forth the vision. We established committees, business opportunities, capital formation, which Eric Weinheimer continues to chair, governance, operations, and outreach. Subsequently, operations and outreach were found to operate better as one consolidated committee than two. Each meeting includes public commentary. The task force is a state agency. As such, it is subject to the state's Open Meetings Act. The participation of the public has been, number one, substantial. Not unusual for us to have 100 or even 150 people attend each of our meetings. But each of those people have really good ideas, are themselves influential folks, and we're able to leverage their relationships, their platforms, and secure really significant buy-in to our various recommendations by virtue of having a big tent approach to everything we do. So the public commentary becomes a significant value add to each of our meetings. So that was the first meeting. We then appointed the committee chairs and members of the committees. We concluded that the work of the committees was too big to expect the committee members alone to discharge the responsibilities without aid from people outside the task force. So it was opened up to the public at large, and that allowed us to have volunteers and subject matter experts support all of our work, and this too really empowered us to do some really important stuff because we had very deep and wide support for what we're doing by people who really were knowledgeable and passionate about these issues. Then the work begins. We've had significant accomplishments. I'm reporting on a few of them here. Let me maybe talk a little bit about the process by which these were accomplished as examples of our work. One, we did bring social impact bonds to Illinois. This was done in concert with a pro bono team from the Kennedy School at Harvard with support from the Rockefeller Foundation. We also have a local private foundation, the Dunham Fund in Aurora, Illinois, that's funded a full-time social impact bond fellow in the governor's office for a year. We went through a request for information process that had 43 responses from service providers who wanted to get in on this futures contract on social outcomes. The governor then selected an issue area, which happens to be at-risk youth. There was then an RFP process, which concluded December 3rd, and I believe an award will be made before this month is out. So this was announced by the governor at the last meeting of the Council on Foundations in Chicago with the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and others of us were present, and it was a big day for Illinois and really a testament to thought leadership within the governor's administration. We also moved forward with an expansion of the L3C law poetic, I guess, because the L3C law was the catalyst by which this task force was born. In all of the states where there are L3Cs currently organized and enabled by statute, they are limited in purpose to charitable or educational organizations. The Illinois law, however, is now being expanded so that its reach also includes religious organizations, scientific organizations, literary organizations, organizations which foster national or international sports competitions, organizations which seek to provide cruelty to children, and organizations which seek to prevent cruelty to animals, all of which are permitted purposes under federal tax law for program-related investments. So this is really catching up with some federal law changes over the last year or so, and we will be the first state to have that expansion of our law. It did pass unanimously in the Senate. It is now in the House, and we're looking for a quick and positive response there. Illinois' cooperative law, we had Ted Howard, who represents the Democracy Collaborative out of the University of Maryland, came in to talk to us about the Evergreen Cooperatives model, and we are looking to tweak that model for local purposes where we can have worker-owned co-ops in areas of our state that are in dire need of revitalization and tap into place-based anchor institutions to become customers of those worker-owned co-ops in furtherance of the sustainability agendas of those institutions, universities and hospitals and museums and the like. So building the customers before you have the entity. The idea, however, is to have workers now become owners and have their own self-respect and their own ability to become self-sufficient financially through the creation of a series of co-ops. As you may know, the Madrigon effort in the Basque region of Spain employs now 92,000 people through a similar strategy. So Illinois had an antiquated co-op law, and I've just redrafted it. It went from a page and a half to, I think, 50 pages. But we do have sponsorship now in the Senate and the House, and my hope is that Illinois will have the best co-op law in the nation, not only for worker-owned co-ops, but farmer co-ops, producer co-ops of all sorts. The idea here not only being to make Illinois stronger through social enterprise and innovation, but really to demonstrate thought leadership so others can follow suit. As we are learning from models employed in other states and even other countries, it is our hope that our thought leadership will empower similar actions around the country and beyond, and that really is part of our mission. We are, in fact, concluding now a social enterprise survey, as I indicated, which became part of our mapping exercise. At the conclusion of the term of the task force in August, that intellectual property, the governor has now agreed, is to be turned over to Social Enterprise Alliance Chicago to create a robust online interactive directory of social enterprises. So we're picking up the ball, and I think it's important to mention that SCA and the task force have worked in a complementary fashion from the get-go, leveraging each other's abilities and influences, and really SCA has been a strongly instrumental part of the successes that the task force now can claim. We also have, and I think it's important to describe this as a victory in its own right, we've now educated a large segment of the public and the business community and other relevant stakeholders about the power of the social enterprise. There is energy, there is commitment. People are galvanized around these opportunities, and I think the task force can legitimately claim credit for that. Just a few examples. And now the question becomes, okay, what do we do for an encore once the term of the task force is concluded? And we are now hard at work and working on that very issue. The concept that's on the table and may be implemented is the creation of a public-private partnership to succeed the task force and to carry on its work. Now that we believe that we've demonstrated our worth and we can point to successes as reasons to continue to have this kind of a capability. We found, however, that there are advantages to being within government and there are advantages to being outside of government. So the recommendation that the task force has recently made includes a public-private partnership where we would have a 501c6 organization, which we're tentatively calling the Illinois Coalition for Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Enterprise. And C6, as you may know, is an association of persons promoting a common business interest. When the task force makes policy recommendations within government, it's not lobbying because it is indeed a government agency. When it makes those same recommendations outside of government, it is lobbying for specific laws or regulations. So a C3 wasn't deemed to be the best choice for that platform. A C6 was because it is not constrained in its ability to lobby. So, and there is a precedent within the state to have a C6 organization which nevertheless is blessed by statute. So it is recognized by law as the governor's think tank around a specific body of knowledge, and therefore gains the respect of the General Assembly rather than somebody else knocking on the doors in Springfield. So the thing we're now playing with is the possible creation of that C6, which in turn would be embodied in state legislation, giving it that status and that stature. So that remains to be seen how that plays out, and I'll keep you informed as we learn more. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Great. So what we're going to do is, it looks like we've got a couple more people who've joined. Why don't you unmute and feel free to ask a question. You can also use the chat function if you'd prefer online, and I'm looking at that right now, and I can also relay the question.
Yes, Mark, hi, this is Joe Cuenco in Florida, and you were at our summit, so we appreciate your sharing your information with us. I guess a question that I would ask is does somebody have an inventory of where all the states are in terms of the L3C filing status? And also, what is the role of SCA National in helping us at the local chapters at a state policy level perspective?
The second question I'll have to defer to others. The first question, yes, in terms of legislation, if you're specifically interested in Florida, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. The answer to that is none. There is. I'm aware of no action in the state of Florida around that space. I mentioned that the L3C was well accepted by both parties in our states. There have been some examples where the political dynamic in a given state and other variables may have led to a less salutary result. I'm unaware of anything in Florida.
Okay, thank you.
And so let me answer your second. Let me answer your second question first, because I'm assuming there could be others who have that question. So, so the National SEA does have a lot of tools and materials. One of the things that Mark was able to leverage to start writing the legislation that he actually put together was our toolkit on task forces. So we have a policy position paper. We also have a toolkit. We also have a grassroots guide. So I would encourage you at a minimum to review those materials so that you can see, kind of get some background on some of the different things. We do a state-by-state analysis and finding out in our major issue areas where everything is, and making sure we kind of are tracking what's going on. So for example, there's a piece of legislation that's active in New York right now, and so we've been monitoring that along with the chapter. But we also use you guys as eyes and ears to make sure we're aware of everything that's going on. As far as proactively helping you, we do have limited dollars to do that, but we do have some money that we can use to get my support at a state level and at a local level, either looking at pieces of legislation. We also are working on a national level to work on relationships with the National League of Cities as well as the National Conference of State Legislators to do kind of a top-down approach. if you're going to the summit, we'll also be doing a policy session at the summit so you can get a federal update as well. So there's a number of things that we provide, and certainly you and I can talk offline about some of the different resources that we do have.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate that.
No problem.
This is Dan from Nashville. And Mark, I've got a question for you. We are, in my policy committee, what we're doing is, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, instead of trying to jump right to a state task force, what we've decided to do is we're in the process of introducing an amendment in the Nashville Metro Council to an existing small business development ordinance, and with the idea to incentivize social enterprise development in Nashville. And we're also looking at, obviously, at bringing B Corps into the state. So I'd like your comment on that. We see those as first steps that we can do right here in Nashville, and then we have, then we can open the door to the governor and say, look at what we're already doing in this city that we can replicate in any other city and across the state. So I'd love your comment on that as far as the strategy we are looking to undertake versus.
I would obviously I would encourage any steps in any direction, and there has been some movement at the municipal level. For example, Philadelphia does offer some municipal tax relief for benefit corps, and there are some other examples which are highly localized. The reality is the heavy lifting is going to get done at the state level. If you look at the city effort really as a stepping stone to get to the state or get the state's attention, that may be a tactical move that is helpful. But the real legislation in terms of deployment of dollars in furtherance of social enterprise, in terms of creating appropriate structures, in terms of creating partnerships with businesses between, all that stuff tends to be state-driven. So I would look at the municipal effort probably as a means to that end rather than something that's going to likely pay significant dividends in its own right, but nevertheless I would certainly encourage the effort.
Thanks.
Sure, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
And just as a side note, we recognize that a number of our chapters are wanting to do local efforts, and so last year we obviously launched the state toolkits. We are going to be launching a local toolkit around purchasing, looking at what has been done in the UK as well as in other countries, and really trying to replicate that and looking like what that replication would look like at a local level here in the United States. So we are bringing in some of the experts from the UK and Scotland on that, and so they're going to be at the summit for that very reason. And then also we'll be doing a special session around purchasing for chapters as well as others, so that's going to be now part of our portfolio. So you will have that option and that, I guess, technical assistance. You've always had that option, but that technical assistance around the local response.
This is Dan again. Is there any possibility to get a hold of any of that information before the summit? We're moving pretty quickly on drawing up our amendment, and we're actually hoping to have it all done to announce at the summit here in Nashville.
Sure, we could certainly talk about that. Yeah, I was unaware that you guys were moving so quickly, so I'm happy to help.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Other questions? So, Mark, I had a question. So I imagine the other thing we're going to be having when we share this is actually with policymakers themselves. And so now you've been able to work with a number of different policymakers. What advice would you give to policymakers who are kind of starting out thinking about social enterprise in working with their colleagues and working with organizations like SEA and pursuing this type of legislation?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And I mentioned my early conversations with Senator Staines, who, by the way, today is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So she's come a long way from the time that she was a freshman senator when she and I both spoke about L3Cs. But the conversation I had with her, candidly, revolved around legacy. And that was a message that resonated with her, and she has been very supportive of everything we're doing by virtue of her focus on the importance of empowering mission-driven ventures. and facilitating their securing of capital and their advantages in governance, signaling, and otherwise. So I think it really has to be integrated into the political stance and perceptions and orientation of the specific policymaker. Now, if it's a person who is ostensibly nonpartisan, that is what I'll call a bureaucrat or a career employee within the government, I think there you're really talking about efficiency and effectiveness of deployment of government resources. Each of these activities affords government the ability to have a social laboratory within the state funded by others. So it's off-balance sheet financing. Think of the social impact bond, for example, where others are stepping up and testing different strategies. Those that prove successful are scaled up, government having no risk. And you can make a similar argument as to each of these. So if it's going to be a person on one or the other side of the aisle, I think the language and message can be tailored to the orientation of that party. If, on the other hand, it's someone who's nonpartisan, I think you're looking at it from a good governance point of view, and I think all those messages are equally valid.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Yes, Suzanne, this is Joe Cuenco again. I have a question regarding the proclamation. So I'm assuming that we're going to be doing the proclamation for the May 10th time, or the week of May 10th. Is that correct?
So we've talked about that. I'm not sure if we are going to push that as much as we did last year, but that's something that SEA is still considering about whether or not we really want that to be a focal point for the summit.
Okay.
I mean, it's certainly something you can do. It's just whether or not we make it a focal point for the summit. I should clarify. Proclamations are good no matter what, and certainly if you want to do a proclamation on your own, there's the template associated with that. But as far as whether or not we're going to be pushing that at the summit this year, I don't think that's going to be as emphasized as other things.
Got it. Thank you.
And Mark, this is Dan again. I've got another question for you. And I know this is something we all struggle with, and obviously you've done an incredible job in Illinois in trying to communicate what a social enterprise is, particularly to the to other stakeholders outside of our sector. Do you have any tips on how? I mean, obviously you have to come up with a definition, and then how to effectively communicate that to the critical stakeholders, so they really understand what we're about, and there's not a lot of confusion about it, because I know there's been a heck of a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think a lot of the confusion derives from the fact that there are competing definitions.
Right.
The way I did it within the slideshow, which I hope we'll share with you, one does provide actually two different ways of kind of tackling the definition. But the other thing I think, which is even easier and more relatable, was that screenshot of lots of logos, because people can say, oh, I get it now because I know that organization, or I think I know that organization, or I know its work. So when they start picking up on 2 or 3 or 4 different organizations within their own locality, then they kind of understand what we're talking about, whether it's a nonprofit that's embraced an earned revenue strategy, or even a for-profit social purpose business. If they can identify with it, if it's something within their frame of reference, if it's familiar to them, and they can generalize from that perception, I think you will have done your job, because it's trying to explain this stuff at an abstract level, I think, is less than productive.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree. That's been our same experience federally, is that really talking about specific organizations has been much more helpful than talking about social enterprise and talking about entrepreneurship in the social sector. We have an upcoming briefing in D.C. About social enterprise, and that's really how we're approaching it. And so obviously the word social enterprise is helpful, but it's just not something that brings an instant level of awareness yet.
Also, I have another question. I don't want to hog all your time, but we're in the process of in building our case for this Metro amendment here in Nashville. We want to be able to show job development and even staffing growth from part-time to full-time, particularly amongst nonprofits where that's very typical. So in your mapping survey of social enterprises, are you tracking that kind of data?
We will be once it's in the hands of SCA, but understand within the state's hands there was a little different objective. But we have captured data, and now we're going to go back and expand the scope of our inquiry as to the respondents, and that's going to allow us to inform the work of the SCA chapter here. Among other things, we're working in partnership with academic institutions locally, and all of this stuff is really collaborative. The only way this stuff ever gets done is through collaboration.
Sure.
When I talk about my experiences, all I'm really saying is I had a conversation with somebody, but nothing gets done until there is sufficient buy-in from the people who actually have the authority or the power or the influence to make it happen. So any one of us might be helpful or a catalyst, but that's really the beginning and the end of anybody's contribution to this stuff. It's in numbers that we have strength, and it's in the merits of our position that we prevail.
Amen.
The other thing you may want to think about is the social enterprise census. There's been some work that's been done at a national level around that.
Okay.
And we've done some, there also was the social enterprise survey that was done by SEA, Duke University, and Community Wealth Ventures about 5 years ago or more.
Okay.
So that's probably our best estimates right now. Just so you know, we recognize that that's a real problem, and so any day now we're going to have people submitting a GAO request to try to get the GAO working on something like that. But in the absence of that, and of course sometimes those requests takes up to 2 years to get completed, those are our best bets as far as giving people some approximation.
Can I just find that on the SCA site?
Yes, those are available on the SCA site. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's just called the Social Enterprise Census?
It's the Social Enterprise Census, or you can also look up the Social Enterprise Survey.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, great. Well, thank you guys so much for participating. We really appreciate it. So this will conclude the call for the Social Enterprise Alliance on the Illinois experience. So thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. And thank everybody on the phone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, everyone, and thanks for your leadership. See you in Nashville.
Yeah, see you, Mark.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, Suzanne.